I stood at my father's funeral wearing a $2,000 suit and felt absolutely nothing. People kept approaching me, touching my arm, saying things like, "I'm so sorry for your loss," and "He was such a good man," and "You must be devastated." I shook their hands. I thanked them for coming. I maintained perfect composure, and I didn't shed a single tear. Not when they closed the casket. Not when they lowered him into the ground. Not when I shoveled dirt onto the polished wood and heard it hit with that final, hollow thud. My aunt whispered to my uncle, "He's in shock. The grief will hit him later." My colleagues assumed I was being stoic, professional, the way lawyers are trained to compartmentalize emotion. But here's the truth nobody wanted to hear. I wasn't in shock. I wasn't being stoic. I simply didn't feel sad that my father was dead. And for 6 months, I told myself that made me a monster, that something was fundamentally broken inside me, that any decent human being would mourn their parent, regardless of the relationship. But I've learned something in these past 6 months. Something uncomfortable, something that challenges everything we're told about family and forgiveness and honoring the dead. Sometimes the absence of grief isn't callousness. Sometimes it's survival. This is the story of why I never cried at my father's funeral, and why, after 38 years, I finally understand that not crying was the most honest thing I've ever done. My father's name was David Chen. Though he was born Chen Wei in Guangzhou, China, he immigrated to the United States in 1978, 6 months before I was born. He came with $800, a mechanical engineering degree that American companies didn't recognize, and a pregnant wife who spoke 3 words of English. Within 5 years, he owned a dry cleaning business. Within 10, he owned 3. By the time I graduated high school, he had 11 locations across the Chicago metro area and a reputation as a shrewd businessman who never gave anyone a break, not his employees, not his competitors, and certainly not his son. People in our neighborhood called him a success story, the American dream personified, a man who pulled himself up by his bootstraps and built an empire from nothing. They didn't know what happened behind closed doors. I need you to understand something about my childhood. It wasn't dramatically abusive. There were no broken bones, no emergency room visits, no investigations by social services. From the outside, we looked like a normal family, better than normal, successful, respectable. My father never hit me. He didn't need to. He had perfected a different kind of violence, the kind that leaves no marks, the kind that makes you question whether you have any right to complain, because, after all, you had food on the table and a roof over your head and opportunities other kids could only dream of. My first memory of my father, my clearest, earliest memory, is of being 4 years old and spilling juice on the kitchen floor. Red juice, fruit punch. I remember watching it spread across the white linoleum like blood. My father didn't yell. He never yelled. Instead, he knelt down, looked me in the eye, and said in Mandarin, "Clumsy children become failures. Do you want to be a failure? No, Baba. Then don't be clumsy." He made me clean it up with the toothbrush. It took 45 minutes. My knees ached. My hands cramped. But I cleaned every drop while he watched, arms crossed, making sure I understood the lesson. I was 4 years old. School was where I learned to be perfect. My father had rules. Strict, inflexible rules that governed every aspect of my existence. Rule 1, only A's. A minus was failure. B was unacceptable. Anything lower didn't exist in our household vocabulary. Rule 2, no friends who might distract from studies. Social life was weakness. Attachment was weakness. Rule 3, activities must have practical value. Piano acceptable, because it demonstrated discipline and culture. Soccer forbidden, because it was just a game with no future. Rule 4, English only in public. Mandarin at home. Never forget where you came from, but never let white people see you as foreign. Rule 5, never question, never argue, never show disrespect. I followed these rules religiously, not out of love or respect, but out of fear. Not fear of physical punishment, but something worse. Fear of his disappointment. Fear of his silence. Fear of becoming invisible in my own home. When I brought home a report card with all A's and won a minus in a class where I couldn't control the outcome because it depended on athletic ability, didn't have my father looked at it for exactly 3 seconds. "You are lazy," he said. Then he didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of eating dinner in silence. 2 weeks of him looking through me like I was made of glass. 2 weeks of my mother whispering, "Just apologize," even though I didn't know what I was apologizing for. I was 11 years old, and I learned a crucial lesson. Father's love was conditional, and the conditions were impossible to meet. High school was a performance. I had the lead role in a play called Perfect Son, and I never broke character. Straight A's, top of my class, National Merit Scholar, acceptance to Northwestern University with a full academic scholarship. My father's response when I told him, "Good. Don't embarrass me there, no congratulations, no pride." Just a reminder that I was a reflection of him, and any failure on my part would be his failure too. At Northwestern, I studied pre-law because my father decided I would be a lawyer. Not because I wanted it, he never asked what I wanted, but because lawyers made money and had status, and those were the only metrics that mattered. I tried once to tell him I was interested in architecture. I'd spent months sketching buildings, teaching myself about design, imagining a different future. He looked at my sketches for about 5 seconds. Then he said, "Drawing pictures doesn't pay bills." I didn't come to this country so you could waste your talent on art. I threw away every sketch that night, deleted every file, killed that dream so thoroughly that sometimes I can barely remember what it felt like to want something for myself. My mother was a ghost in all of this, present but powerless. She loved me, I know she did, but she loved my father more, or feared him more. I was never quite sure which. When I was 16, I came home to find her crying in the kitchen. Quiet, controlled crying, the only kind allowed in our house. "Mom, what's wrong?" She wiped her face quickly. "Nothing, just tired." "Did Dad? Your father works very hard," she said, in that automatic way people defend abusers. "He wants the best for us. He's mean to you." "He's not mean. He's demanding. It's cultural." You wouldn't understand, but I did understand. I understood that cultural was the excuse we used, the story we told ourselves to make it acceptable, as if being Chinese meant being cruel, as if immigration trauma gave you permission to traumatize your own family. My mother died when I was 23, during my first year of law school. Ovarian cancer. By the time they found it, it had spread everywhere. My father didn't cry at her funeral either. He stood there in his dark suit, accepted condolences, and 2 days later, he was back at work. When I asked if he wanted to talk about her, he said, "Talking doesn't change anything. She's gone. We move forward." That was the Chen family philosophy. Bury your feelings deeper than you bury your dead. After my mother died, something in me fundamentally shifted. I'd spent my entire life trying to earn my father's approval, trying to be perfect enough, successful enough, Chinese enough, American enough, whatever version of enough would finally make him see me as worthy. But standing at my mother's grave, watching my father's complete absence of emotion, I realized he's incapable of love. Not because I'm not worthy, but because something in him is broken. It should have been liberating. It wasn't. Because knowing your parent is emotionally unavailable doesn't make you stop wanting their love. It just makes you feel pathetic for still wanting it. I finished law school, passed the bar on my first attempt, got recruited by one of Chicago's most prestigious corporate firms, made junior partner in 6 years faster than anyone in the firm's history. My father's response, about time, not pride, not recognition of how hard I'd worked, just an acknowledgement that I'd met the bare minimum of his expectations. I stopped calling him unless absolutely necessary. Visits became obligatory, holidays only. We'd sit across from each other at restaurant tables. He refused to eat at my apartment because he said it was too Western, and make stilted conversation about work and weather and nothing that mattered. He never asked about my life, never asked if I was happy, never asked if I was seeing anyone, which was good, because I wasn't. Dating required vulnerability I didn't possess. Relationships required emotional availability I never learned. At 35, I'd had exactly 3 serious relationships, and all of them ended the same way. You're like talking to a wall, Marcus. You never let anyone in. They were right. I was my father's son after all. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was in a deposition, about to cross-examine a witness, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. My assistant knocked on the conference room door. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's urgent. It's about your father. Heart attack. Massive. He'd collapsed at his flagship dry cleaning location, surrounded by industrial steamers and plastic-wrapped suits. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was already gone. He was 71 years old. According to his doctor who called me that afternoon with details I hadn't asked for, he'd had high blood pressure for years, high cholesterol, warning signs he'd ignored because doctors just want your money. My father died the way he lived, stubborn, refusing help, and utterly alone. The funeral arrangements fell to me. Only child, only family left in the country. His siblings were still in China, too elderly to travel. I hired a funeral home, picked a casket, wrote an obituary that made him sound like a beloved community figure instead of a tyrant in a business suit. David Chen, 71, a successful entrepreneur and pillar of the Chinese American community, passed away suddenly on March 12th. He is survived by his son, Marcus. He will be remembered for his dedication to his family and his indomitable work ethic. Every word was a lie. But that's what you do, isn't it? You lie about the dead. You sanitize them. You turn complicated, damaged people into saints because speaking ill of them feels like breaking some sacred rule. People came to the funeral. So many people, business associates, employees from his dry cleaning empire, members of the Chinese Business Association, second-generation immigrants who'd known my father casually and believed the myth of his success. They lined up to pay respects, to tell me stories about how generous he'd been, how hard-working, how dedicated. A woman I didn't recognize approached me, clutching a tissue. "Your father gave my husband a job when no one else would," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We just immigrated. We had nothing. Your father saw potential in him." I nodded, smiled, said, "Thank you for sharing that." What I didn't say: "Your husband worked 80-hour weeks for minimum wage. My father saw cheap labor, not potential." A former employee came through the line, Mr. Park, who'd worked at our original location for 12 years. "Your father was tough," he said, "but fair. He taught me discipline." What I didn't say: "He fired you for taking a sick day when your daughter was in the hospital." Story after story after story, each one painting my father as a complex, but ultimately good man. A man who'd overcome adversity. A man worth mourning. And I stood there, shaking hands, accepting condolences, feeling nothing. The service was Buddhist, though my father hadn't been religious. It was performative, like everything else in his life. What would people think if we didn't have a proper ceremony? The monk chanted sutras. Incense smoke filled the room. People bowed. The whole ritual felt like theater, beautiful, meaningless theater. When it was time for me to speak, I walked to the front and read from prepared remarks I'd written at a.m., unable to sleep, staring at a blank document for 2 hours before I could type a single word. "My father came to this country with nothing," began, and the audience nodded along. They'd heard this story before, the immigrant narrative they wanted to believe. "He worked tirelessly to build a life for our family. He never took shortcuts. He never gave up. He taught me the value of hard work and persistence." All true statements, all missing the crucial context. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. The audience murmured agreement. They thought I meant his actions showed love. They didn't understand I meant his actions showed exactly who he was, a man incapable of softness. I sat down. People dabbed at their eyes. Someone squeezed my shoulder, and I felt nothing, absolutely nothing. The weeks after the funeral were strange. I went back to work immediately, just like my father would have wanted. My colleagues tiptoed around me, speaking in hushed tones, offering to take cases off my plate. "I'm fine," I kept saying. "Really, I'm fine." And I was. That was the disturbing part. I wasn't pretending to be okay. I genuinely was okay. No insomnia, no loss of appetite, no crying in the shower or at random moments throughout the day. I'd seen colleagues go through parental loss. I knew what grief was supposed to look like. This wasn't it. My father's estate was straightforward. He'd left everything to me. The dry cleaning businesses, his condo, his savings. It amounted to roughly $3.2 million. I sat in the estate lawyer's office, listening to him explain the assets, and all I could think was, he bought my entire childhood for $3.2 million. Is that a good deal? Will you keep the businesses? The lawyer asked. No, sell them. Are you sure? They're quite profitable. Sell them. All of it. I didn't want his money. I didn't want his empire. I didn't want anything that reminded me he'd existed. But of course, I kept the money. Because I'm not stupid. And because some small, petty part of me thought, you spent 38 years trying to make me into something I wasn't. The least you can do is pay for my therapy. Speaking of therapy, started going 3 weeks after the funeral. Not because I was grieving, but because my senior partner, a kind man in his 60s who'd lost his own father years ago, cornered me in the parking garage. Marcus, I'm worried about you. I'm fine. Oh, you're not. You're too fine. It's unnatural. What do you want me to do? Fall apart? I'm functional. I'm meeting all my deadlines. That's what concerns me. You haven't taken a single day off. You haven't shown any emotion. You're acting like your father just went on vacation, not died. Maybe that's how I grieve. Or maybe you're avoiding something that's going to eat you alive if you don't face it. He gave me his therapist's number. Dr. Sarah Goldman specializes in family trauma and complicated grief. I threw the card away, found it in my trash can 3 days later, stared at it for an hour, made an appointment. Dr. Goldman's office was in Lincoln Park, in one of those converted brownstones that somehow manages to feel both professional and homey. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, a box of tissues prominently placed on the side table. I eyed the tissues like they were a threat. Dr. Goldman was in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of face that makes you think she's heard everything and been shocked by nothing. Tell me why you're here, Marcus. My father died 2 months ago. I didn't cry at his funeral. People think that's weird. Do you think it's weird? I think it's honest. Tell me about your father. And here's where I was supposed to break down, where the dam was supposed to burst and all the repressed grief was supposed to come flooding out. Instead, I told her the truth, methodically, chronologically, like I was presenting a case. The impossible standards, the emotional neglect, the conditional love that was really just control. The way he treated my mother, the way he treated me, the person-shaped hole where a father should have been. Dr. Goldman listened, didn't interrupt, didn't rush to judgment. When I finished, she said, "You're waiting for me to tell you it's okay not to grieve him, aren't you? Isn't it? Marcus, can I ask you something? When you think about your father dying, what do you feel?" I considered the question honestly, tried to locate any emotion beyond the numbness. Relief, I said finally. I feel relief that I never have to disappoint him again. And how does that make you feel? Like a terrible person. Why? Because you're supposed to love your parents. You're supposed to mourn them. Society says, fuck what society says. I blinked. Therapists aren't supposed to curse. She leaned forward. Marcus, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. You don't owe anyone grief. Not society, not your father's memory, not the people who think they knew him. You especially don't owe grief to a man who spent your entire life making you feel like you were never enough. But he's dead. Doesn't that change things? Death doesn't erase abuse. It doesn't suddenly make a bad parent good. And it doesn't obligate you to feel something you don't feel. Then why do I feel guilty? Because you're human. Because we're taught that family is everything. That blood is thicker than water, all these platitudes that sound nice, but ignore the reality that some families are toxic, that some parents do more harm than good. She paused. Let that sink in. Tell me something, if your father were still alive, would you have a relationship with him? No, why not? Because he made me miserable. Because every interaction with him made me feel small and worthless, and like I was fundamentally broken. So his death didn't actually take anything from you, did it? You'd already lost him. Or rather, you never really had him to lose. And there it was. The truth I'd been circling for 2 months. I wasn't grieving because there was nothing to grieve. You can't mourn a relationship that never existed. You can't cry over the loss of someone who was never really present. That session with Dr. Goldman cracked something open. Not grief, I still didn't feel that, but something else, something harder to name. I went back the following week, and the week after, and the week after that. We talked about my childhood, my mother, the invisible scars left by emotional neglect, the ways I'd learned to shut down my own feelings because feelings were dangerous in my father's house. You became what he wanted, Dr. Goldman said during our 4th session. You turned yourself into a perfect, emotionless achievement machine, and now you don't know how to be anything else. I'm successful, I said defensively. I'm good at my job. You're successful at being your father's puppet. But who is Marcus? Not Marcus the lawyer or Marcus the perfect son. Just Marcus. I didn't have an answer. 6 months after the funeral, something unexpected happened. I was cleaning out my father's condo, a task I'd been avoiding, paying monthly fees to keep it exactly as he'd left it because I wasn't ready to face it. The place was sterile, impersonal. It looked like a hotel room, not somewhere a human being had lived for 15 years. Minimal furniture, no photos, no personal touches, just a meticulously clean space that revealed nothing about its occupant. In his bedroom closet, I found a box, cardboard, old, shoved in the back behind precisely organized rows of identical black and navy suits. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all in Mandarin, all from China, all from my father's sister, my Aunt Mai, who I'd met exactly twice in my life. I couldn't read most of it. My Mandarin was limited to basic conversation, but I took photos, used a translation app, and slowly pieced together the story. My father had sent money. Every month for 40 years, he'd sent money back to China, supporting his elderly parents, helping his siblings, paying for his nephew's education, his niece's wedding, medical bills for family I never met. Thousands of dollars over the decades, maybe hundreds of thousands. One letter, from 15 years ago, stood out. Wei, you are too generous. You work so hard, and we take so much. When will you rest? When will you think of yourself? You have a son. Spend time with him. We will manage. My father's response, tucked in the same envelope. My son doesn't need me. He needs money for education. I will work. That is how I show love. I read that line 7 times. That is how I show love. I called my therapist from my father's empty living room. Sarah, I found something. Letters. My father was supporting his entire family in China for decades. How does that make you feel? I don't know. Confused. He sent them money, but couldn't say a kind word to his own son. He was generous to them, but cruel to me. How does that make sense? Marcus, people are complicated. Trauma creates patterns. Your father grew up in extreme poverty during one of China's hardest periods. He was taught that love is sacrifice, that providing is affection, that feelings are weakness. That doesn't excuse, no, doesn't. It doesn't excuse anything he did to you, but maybe it explains it. Your father was broken, Marcus, by poverty, by cultural expectations, by his own childhood, and he passed that brokenness to you. So what do I do with that? Whatever you need to do. You can be angry that he wasn't better. You can understand why he was the way he was. You can do both. The point is, his damage doesn't have to become your damage. I sat in that apartment until sunset, holding those letters, and I felt something. Not forgiveness, not grief, but maybe understanding. My father was a victim who became a perpetrator. He was hurt, so he hurt me. He was denied affection, so he denied it to me. He survived by becoming hard, and that hardness killed any chance of real connection. He loved me the only way he knew how, by working himself to death to provide a life better than the one he'd had. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. You can't build a relationship on money alone. But for the first time, I saw him as a complete person. Flawed, damaged, doing his broken best. It didn't make me love him, but it made me stop hating him. And more importantly, it made me stop hating myself for not grieving him. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I took out actual paper, and I wrote. Not a letter to my father. He was gone, and I had nothing to say to him. Instead, I wrote to myself, to the child I was, to every version of Marcus who tried so desperately to be perfect. Dear Marcus, you were enough. You were always enough. The problem was never you. Your father couldn't love you the way you needed because he didn't know how. Nobody taught him. And he was too proud, too damaged, too trapped in his own pain to learn. That's not your fault. It's not your responsibility to fix. It's not your burden to carry. You don't have to cry at his funeral. You don't have to grieve a relationship that never existed. You don't have to feel guilty for feeling relief. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be hurt. You're allowed to acknowledge that your father failed you in fundamental ways. And you're also allowed to move forward, to build a life that isn't defined by his expectations or his limitations. You're allowed to be imperfect, to fail, to want things that don't make money or impress anyone, to be messy and human and flawed. You're allowed to be free. Love, Marcus. I folded the letter, put it in my wallet. I carry it still. It's been a year now since my father died. I still haven't cried, but I've done other things. I quit my job at the corporate firm, used some of my inheritance to start my own practice, focused on pro bono immigration law, helping people like my father navigate a system designed to break them. It doesn't pay as well. My father would hate it, and that's precisely why it feels right. I started dating someone. Her name is Jennifer. She's a social worker, which means she sees through my walls immediately and calls me on my bullshit with terrifying accuracy. You know, you do this thing where you deflect with humor when anything gets too real. She said last week, I have no idea what you're talking about, I said, immediately making a joke. She laughed. There it is. It's hard. Intimacy is hard. Vulnerability is hard. Unlearning 38 years of emotional shutdown is maybe the hardest thing I've ever done. But I'm trying. That's new. Trying instead of just achieving. I think about my father sometimes. Not with longing or grief, but with something adjacent to pity. He spent his entire life working, building, providing, and for what? He died alone, surrounded by strangers, in a business he built, but never seemed to enjoy. He never took a vacation, never pursued a hobby, never told anyone he loved them, never let anyone truly know him. What a waste. What a profound, tragic waste of a life. I refuse to do the same. Last month, I did something my father would have considered frivolous. I took an architecture class. Just for fun. No practical purpose. No career advancement. Just because the 16-year-old version of me who'd wanted to design buildings deserved to explore that dream, even belatedly. My first project was a disaster. The proportions were wrong. The design was derivative. The instructor gave me a C, and I didn't care. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was trying to be human. People still ask sometimes. Colleagues who knew my father, members of the Chinese business community, how are you doing? It must be so hard. I've stopped lying, stopped giving them the grief performance they expect. I'm okay, I say now. We had a complicated relationship. Most people nod uncomfortably and change the subject. They don't want complicated. They want the simple story. Devoted son mourns beloved father. But a few people, the ones who've lived through their own family traumas, they understand. They see the truth I'm telling and they say, yeah, family is complicated, and that's enough. That simple acknowledgement that not all parent-child relationships are worth mourning. That love isn't automatic just because you share DNA. There's a quote from James Baldwin that Dr. Goldman shared with me. Perhaps home is not a place, but simply an irrevocable condition. For years, I thought home was my father's approval, that if I could just be perfect enough, achieve enough, be exactly what he wanted, I'd finally feel like I belonged somewhere. But my father's approval was never possible. The goalpost always moved. The standards always increased. I was chasing something that didn't exist. Home isn't my father's acceptance. Home is accepting myself. Home is understanding that his failure to love me wasn't my failure to be lovable. Home is building a life that isn't defined by someone else's trauma. I visited my father's grave last week. First time since the funeral. I didn't bring flowers. Didn't say a prayer, just stood there, looking at his name carved in granite. David Chen, 1953 to 2020. For father, that single word, father. It felt insufficient, inaccurate. He was biologically my father, yes. But fatherhood is more than biology. It's presence. It's emotional availability. It's making your child feel safe and valued and loved. My father was a provider, a disciplinarian, a man trapped in his own pain. But he wasn't really a father, and I'm okay with that now. I don't need to rewrite history or convince myself our relationship was something it wasn't. I stood there for maybe 10 minutes. Then I said, out loud, I'm going to be okay. Not because of you, not in spite of you, just, okay. And I walked away. Here's what I want you to understand: if you're carrying guilt about not grieving someone you're supposed to mourn, you don't owe anyone grief. Not family members who expect it, not society that demands it, not the memory of the person who died. Grief is for losses that matter, for relationships that had value, for people who showed up in ways that made your life better. If someone spent their life making you feel small and unworthy, their death isn't a loss. It's an ending, maybe even a release. And that's okay. You're not a bad person for feeling relief instead of sadness. You're not broken for failing to cry. You're just honest. The world wants simple narratives. Love your parents, honor the dead, forgive and forget. But real life is messier. Some parents don't deserve to be loved. Some dead don't deserve to be honored. And some things shouldn't be forgiven or forgotten. According to research from the American Psychological Association, approximately 27% of adult children report being estranged from at least one parent. Millions of people are navigating complicated relationships with family members who cause them harm. You're not alone. You're not a monster. You're just a survivor figuring out how to live with the truth. I never cried at my father's funeral, and I probably never will. Not because I'm cold or unfeeling or emotionally stunted, though I spent months believing all of those things about myself, but because crying requires loss, and you can't lose something you never had. My father died, yes, but the father I needed, the one who was emotionally present, supportive, loving, that father never existed. You can't mourn a ghost. What I am grieving, slowly, painfully, in therapy and through journaling and in conversations with Jennifer when I can force myself to be vulnerable, what I'm grieving is the childhood I should have had, the parent who should have existed, the unconditional love I deserved and never received. That's worth crying over, and I do, sometimes, now, late at night, in Dr. Goldman's office, when I see fathers with their children and something in me aches for what could have been. But I don't cry for my father, I cry for myself. For the child who tried so hard to be perfect and never understood that perfect was impossible. And maybe that's the healthiest grief I could experience. If you're listening to this and you recognize yourself in my story, if you have a parent whose death you don't know how to grieve, or if you're terrified of what people will think when you don't fall apart, I want you to hear this. Your feelings are valid. Your truth is valid. You get to decide what your relationship with your parent means, both in life and in death. Don't perform grief for other people. Don't pretend to feel something you don't feel. Don't let anyone tell you how you should respond to loss. Be honest. Be kind to yourself. And understand that healing doesn't always look like the movies want it to. Sometimes healing looks like relief, like building a better life, like breaking generational cycles of trauma. Sometimes healing looks like standing at a grave and feeling nothing but peace. My father left me $3.2 million and a lifetime of psychological damage. I kept the money. I'm fixing the damage. And I'm building something he never had, a life worth living. Not for achievement or status or external validation, but for joy, for connection, for the messy, imperfect, beautifully human experience of actually being alive instead of just surviving. That's my inheritance. Not his money or his business or his impossible standards, but his cautionary tale, the lesson of what not to become. I never cried at my father's funeral, and I've made peace with that, because tears aren't a measure of love. They're a measure of loss. And the truth is, I lost my father long before he died. I lost him the first time I spilled juice, and he made me clean it with the toothbrush. I lost him every time he looked through me instead of at me. I lost him the day I realized I would never be enough. His death didn't take him from me. It just made official what had always been true. I was on my own. I always had been. And now, finally, I'm okay with that. More than okay. I'm free.